In this short tutorial, you will learn how to calculate excess reserves. The formula for calculating the excess reserves is to write down the formula for calculating the required reserves, that is, deposit times the required reserve ratio. You will then substitute the deposit made by the individual into the formula. You will then substitute the required reserve ratio into the formula. You will multiply the deposit by the required reserve ratio. You will next need to write down the formula for calculating the excess reserves. The excess reserves is calculated by deposit minus required reserves. Next, you'll substitute in the deposit made by the individual into the formula. Next, you'll substitute in the required reserves into the formula, and then you'll subtract the required reserves from the deposit. Let us suppose that a bank receives a deposit of $1,000. The government requires the bank to keep 10% of its money in reserve. What is the bank's excess reserves? The first step is to multiply the deposit by the reserve requirement ratio. In this case, the deposit was of $1,000, so we substitute 1,000 into the formula. Next, we need to find the reserve requirement ratio. We see that the government requires the bank to keep 10% of its money in reserve. So we're going to substitute in 10% into the formula. Notice that the 10% is converted into a decimal fraction. This can be done by entering in the percent into a calculator, pressing the divide key, and then typing 100 into the calculator, and then pressing the equal sign. This will convert it into a decimal fraction. Next step is to multiply the amount of deposit times the reserve ratio. In this case, we have 1,000 times 0.10, and that gives us an answer of 100. The 100 can be found by typing in 1,000, pressing the multiply key, typing in the point, followed by 1 and a 0, and then followed by an equal sign. And this will give you a value of $100. So our required reserve is $100. Next, we're going to write down the formula for calculating the excess reserves. The formula for excess reserves is deposit minus required reserves. In this case, the bank received a deposit of $1,000. So we will substitute 1,000 in for the deposit. Our required reserves are $100. So we will substitute in $100 into the formula. Our next step is to subtract 100 from 1,000, or 1,000 minus 100, and this gives 900. So the bank has $900 of excess reserves. This is important because excess reserves are used to make loans to individuals and to businesses. The answer is the amount of excess reserves that can be loaned out is $900.